Nice ink, Grandpa. Did you get that done in a basement with a rusty needle? Or did you let your grandkids doodle on you with a permanent marker? The locker room erupted in raucous laughter as Private First Class Distinctive Jax Jackson pointed a mocking finger at the elderly custodian's forearm. Clint Colton, a man of 70 with skin like parchment and eyes like deep still water, didn't flinch. He continued mopping the tile floor, the soapy water swirling around his worn work boots. The tattoo in question was indeed strange, a series of jagged, uneven black hatch marks that crisscrossed his forearm in a chaotic, nonsensical pattern. It looked less like art and more like a mistake, a smear of ink that had bled and faded over decades. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Pops," Jackson sneered, stepping onto the wet floor, his towel draped over his neck. "What is that? A tic-tac-toe game you lost?" The disrespect in the room was palpable, a thick fog of arrogance coming from young men who had earned the title of Marine but hadn't yet felt the weight of war. They saw Clint as nothing more than the janitor who cleaned up their sweat and mud. But they were about to learn that some ink isn't bought with money. It's paid for in blood. If you believe that every scar tells a story and that our elders deserve our absolute respect, go ahead and type the word hero in the comments right now. Let's show the world where we stand. Clint Colton was invisible to most of the base personnel. He was the guy who fixed the leaky faucets, replaced the flickering light bulbs, and mopped the locker rooms after the morning PT sessions. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, his shoulders perpetually hunched as if carrying an invisible rucksack. He never spoke about his past, and because he wore a standard blue maintenance uniform instead of camis, the new recruits assumed he was just a civilian hire, a washed-up old-timer scraping by on a minimum wage pension. The platoon of young Marines, fresh out of infantry school and feeling invincible, used him as a backdrop for their locker room banter. Jackson, the loudest of the bunch, had fixated on Clint's arm when the old man had rolled up his sleeves to wring out the mop. The tattoo was ugly. There was no denying it. It was a mess of 42 distinct jagged lines, some long, some short, grouped in no apparent order. To an untrained eye, it looked like prison graffiti. "Leave him alone, Jax," a quieter recruit, Private Miller, mumbled, feeling a twinge of guilt. "He's just doing his job." But Jackson wasn't having it. He was high on adrenaline and the need to establish dominance. "Nah, I want to know," Jackson pressed, blocking Clint's path to the utility closet. "Seriously, old man, did you get that while you were drunk? Or is that how you count how many times you've been rejected?" The squad howled with laughter again. Clint finally stopped mopping. He stood up straight, wincing slightly as his back cracked. He looked Jackson dead in the eye. The recruits expected fear or submission. Instead, they saw a gaze that was terrifyingly empty, the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen things that would break the minds of the boys standing before him. "It's a reminder," Clint said, his voice gravelly and low. "Just a reminder," Jackson scoffed, unimpressed. "A reminder of what? Never to go to a cheap tattoo artist?" The laughter reached a crescendo, bouncing off the tiled walls, but it was cut short instantly by the sound of the heavy metal door slamming open. "Is there a comedian in this squad that I need to know about?" The voice was thunderous. General Marcus Sterling stood in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a sudden drop in atmospheric pressure. He was the base commander, a decorated war hero known for his no-nonsense leadership. The room went dead silent. The recruits scrambled to stand at attention, towels slipping, eyes fixed forward. "General on deck!" someone shouted, too late. General Sterling walked slowly into the room, his boots clicking ominously on the tile. He looked at the terrified recruits and then turned his gaze to the old janitor. The general's eyes narrowed as he saw Clint. He didn't look at the mop or the uniform. He looked at the face. Then his eyes dropped to the jagged, ugly tattoo on Clint's forearm. The general's composure, usually made of stone, cracked. His jaw tightened, and the color drained slightly from his face. He walked past the trembling Jackson and stopped inches from Clint. "Sergeant Major Colton?" the general whispered, the question hanging heavy in the air. Clint gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Just Clint now, sir. I'm retired." The general looked at the tattoo again, staring at the chaotic lines with a mix of horror and awe. He reached out, his hand hovering over the old man's arm without touching it, as if it were a holy relic. "You boys think this is funny?" The general's voice was quiet now, dangerous. He turned to face the squad, his eyes blazing. "Private Jackson, step forward." Jackson stepped forward, sweating profusely. "You were asking about this ink. You think it looks like a joke?" The general grabbed Clint's wrist gently and held it up for the room to see. "Look at it. Look closely." The recruits squinted. Up close, the lines were clearly scarring, ink driven deep into the skin, possibly with a knife or a field needle. "This isn't art," the general barked. "This is a ledger." "Does anyone here know what the ghost reconnaissance units were in the late 60s? The general asked. Silence. "Of course not. They were classified. They didn't exist. They were dropped behind enemy lines with no ID, no support, and no promise of extraction. Their job was to disappear, disrupt, and survive." The general traced one of the jagged lines on Clint's skin with his finger. "This one here? This isn't a doodle. This is the jagged ridgeline of a mountain pass in Laos. Clint carried a wounded teammate 12 miles over that terrain with a bullet in his own leg." The general moved his finger to a cluster of shorter, chaotic marks. "And these represent the days he spent in a tiger cage in Cambodia, keeping 3 other men alive by feeding them bugs and rainwater while he starved." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Jackson felt like he was shrinking, his arrogance evaporating, leaving only a cold pit of shame in his stomach. The general wasn't done. "There are 42 marks on this arm," Sterling continued, his voice trembling with emotion. 42 successful extractions. 42 times this man went into hell when no one else would, and he came back. Every time he survived a mission where the odds were 0, he added a mark. Not for vanity, but so that if his body was ever found, we would know how many missions he completed for his country before he fell. The general looked at Clint, tears welling in his eyes. "I was marked number 38, the general said softly. "I was a captain. My chopper went down. I was surrounded. This man, this janitor, he came out of the jungle like a demon. He dragged me to the LZ. He took shrapnel in his back covering me. I never got to thank him because he vanished before I woke up in the hospital." The revelation hit the recruits like a physical blow. They weren't looking at a confused old man with a bad tattoo. They were looking at a phantom, a living legend who had walked through fire 42 times. The ugly ink was a map of sacrifice, a history book written in skin and pain. Jackson looked at the mop in Clint's hand and felt a wave of nausea. He had mocked a man who had saved the general's life. He had laughed at scars that bought his freedom. I didn't know," Jackson stammered, his voice breaking. Clint gently pulled his arm back from the general's grip and rolled his sleeve down, covering the history again. "It's all right, General," Clint said, his voice calm and devoid of bitterness. "They're young. They don't need to know about the ghosts. They just need to focus on the future." He looked at Jackson, not with anger, but with a strange kind of pity. "The ink is ugly, son. I know that. War is ugly. It's not like the movies. It leaves a mark on you that never looks pretty. Don't be in such a hurry to get your own." General Sterling snapped to attention. It was a sharp, crisp movement. He rendered a slow, perfect salute to the janitor. "Sergeant Major," the general said formally. Clint hesitated, then straightened his back, the years of slouching falling away for a brief second. He returned the salute, his hand perfectly flat, his eyes sharp. "Sir," Clint replied. The general turned to the squad. If I ever hear a word of disrespect toward this man again, you will be out of this corps before you can blink. Is that clear?" "Sir, yes, sir," the platoon roared, shaken to their cores. As the IT general turned to leave, he stopped at the door. "Clint," he said. "My office, 0800 tomorrow. You're done pushing a mop. I need an instructor for the advanced CRA school. I need someone who actually knows how to survive." Clint smiled, a genuine smile this time. "I might stop by, sir, if my knees hold up." The general left, and the room returned to silence. Jackson stood there for a long moment, then walked over to the bucket. He took the mop from Clint's hands. "Let me do that, Sergeant Major," Jackson said quietly, his head bowed. "Please, let me finish this." Clint looked at the young Marine, saw the genuine regret in his eyes, and nodded. "All right, Marine. Watch the corners. That's where the dirt hides." That day, a group of arrogant boys became men. They learned that heroes don't always wear capes or medals. Sometimes they wear gray coveralls and hold a mop. They learned that the strangest scars often hold the deepest honors. And they learned that before you laugh at a man's past, you better make sure you have the strength to carry his burden. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in the hidden heroes who walk among us, hit that subscribe button and share this video. Let's ensure that every veteran story is heard and respected. Until next time, remember, never judge a book by its cover, and never judge a warrior by his ink.